If you're pro-life, you've probably been accused of only caring about children before they're born. In other words, you care about fetuses in the womb, but once the child is born, you don't. As pro-life people, when we hear this common accusation, our gut instinct is to try to prove that it's not true. We get out our laundry list of things that we do to demonstrate our concern for children after they're born. For example, we volunteered for so-and-so charity. We donated to so-and-so cause. We adopted a child. We took in children from foster care. The list goes on. All easily verifiable acts of kindness that pro-life people do with regularity. But what's the typical response we hear from the pro-choice culture that makes this accusation? Well, even though you've adopted a number of children, it's not enough. There are millions of disadvantaged children in the world. Or, even though you've given tens of thousands to charity, we need billions of dollars to solve the problems that children and families face. In other words, no matter what we do or say, it's never going to be enough to shake the unfair and untrue criticism that pro-life people only care about children when they're in the womb. It's just a red herring that the pro-choice movement uses to distract from the real issue of thinking about what abortion actually does to a living human being in the womb. So, given our conundrum, I suggest a new strategy. Our strategy going forward should be to demonstrate that the act of saving a life is a good and righteous act in and of itself, regardless of whether or not we commit to the long-term care of the life that we save. In other words, the pro-choice movement is trying to tell us that if we do not commit to the long-term care of babies after they're born, then saving their lives is not a good thing. Indeed, they are saying that the Good Samaritan was not actually good because he did not agree to care for the man on the side of the road forever. Let's look at some of the other examples that demonstrate this important principle. Let's say that you're a firefighter and you're called to a terrible fire at a house. You're standing outside the house with an axe, ready to go in and save a child who is trapped inside the house. But someone stops you. They look you in your eye and say, "Firefighter, I know you're about to go into a burning house to save that child, but here's the thing. Both of her parents have already been killed by the fire, and the house is going to be lost too. So this child will have no parents and no home. So I need you to pledge to care for this child's every need after you save her. If you're unwilling or unable to care for this child after you save her, then it's not a good or heroic act to save her." Now, any good firefighter would of course ignore this person and immediately run into the burning house to save the child's life. Why? Because saving a child's life in and of itself is a good thing. And we have determined that the value of our good deeds is not contingent on anything we promise or pledge to do after we do the good deed. Saving a life is good, period. That is why we don't require firefighters, for example, to pledge to care for the people they save. The act of saving a life is good in and of itself. This act has intrinsic value. If that analogy isn't good enough for you, here's another. Let's say you're trained in CPR. You approach someone who's not breathing and you're about to administer CPR. But again, someone stops you, looks you in the eye, and makes you promise that you will continue to care for this person after you save their life. Again, you would ignore this person and go ahead and use CPR to save the life. Why? Because again, saving a life has intrinsic value that is not based upon any additional good that you promise or don't promise to do afterwards. So, this is exactly what people in the pro-life movement are doing. We are saving lives, and the value of the act of saving a life, that good deed, is in no way contingent upon any pledge or promise we make on top of that good deed. That is why you can say that it doesn't really matter what you do after the child is born. Here's another way of thinking about this that brings the point home even further. If it's true that saving a life is not good unless you plan to care for the life afterwards, then it follows logically that it's good to not save a life if you're unwilling or unable to care for the life afterwards. So logically, you can go through life never having to save anyone's life or doing any good acts, And when asked why you're unable or unwilling to do so, you can simply say, well, I'm not able to provide long-term care, so I refuse to help people. Would we see this as a good thing? Of course not. Why? Because again, we all have an innate understanding that the very act of saving a life is a good thing. How does this apply to the abortion situation? When pro-choice people make this accusation, what they're really saying is this: if a baby survives the womb, if she is not aborted, then I will help her have a quality of life, but I won't do anything to ensure that she doesn't get aborted. How do I know this is true? Because this sad reality is demonstrated daily by how the pro-choice movement spends all of its resources and influence removing obstacles to abortion, but they spend considerably less time, talent, and treasure removing obstacles to life for women who are in difficult pregnancies but want to carry to term. The pro-choice movement is generally silent in those situations. If anything, the pro-choice movement seeks to stop organizations like pregnancy centers who are trying to remove obstacles to birth. And if this isn't enough, the "you only care about unborn children before they are born" accusation is problematic for another reason. Pro-choice people have the same obligation as pro-life people to care for children after they are born. It's not only pro-life people that have this obligation, pro-choice people do too. So, rather than trying to prove that you care by listing all the ways that you support children, you should ask the pro-choice person to show you how they care for children after they're born. After all, if you're pro-choice, that means that you support a woman's choice, abortion or birth, no matter what choice she makes. So, if she chooses to carry a pregnancy to term, whether you agree with her choice or not, you have just as much of an obligation to help her bring the child into the world as a pro-life person does, and to help to care for the child after birth. So, what does their unwillingness to show they care demonstrate about the pro-choice position? If we're being honest, it shows that too many pro-choice people see abortion as the only good choice. It's as if they're saying, the burden of caring for all of these unwanted children is just too much, so they're better off being aborted. Now, very few pro-choice people would admit this out loud, but it's where their logic takes them, and therefore they would sound more pro-abortion, like eugenicists, than pro-choice. Finally, I want to say a quick word about the work of pregnancy centers, which work every day to provide compassion, hope, and help to women and men facing difficult pregnancy decisions. There are about 3,500 such organizations across the country, including 1,100 plus that are affiliated with CareNet. In the last 4 years, CareNet pregnancy centers alone have provided over $250 million in free services to their communities. Pro-choice people generally oppose these organizations. So in conclusion, don't let the pro-choice movement silence you by accusing you of only caring for children while they're in the womb. First, tell them that saving lives has intrinsic value. Then ask them what they are doing to save lives and to care for them after they've been saved. Then, for good measure, tell them about all the things that you and your pro-life friends are doing to help children and families. Remind them that the Good Samaritan actually did good. For CareNet, I'm Roland Warren.